Hey everyone. I think people are starting to join, so I'm just going to give it another minute before getting started. But welcome. Okay, looks like the number is still going up. We'll give it one more minute. Okay, let's jump into it. Hi everyone. I am Aram Chaudhry, and I am our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at the Lufthansa Group. For those of you who haven't heard of Lufthansa, it is an aviation company, so in the airlines industry, and I started this role about a year and a half ago. I'm out of New York, been here pretty much most of my life after moving from the Middle East, and have been working in the space of recruitment, talent strategy, HR, DEI for the last 10 years across a few different companies. And ERGs have been such a big part of my role in so many of my jobs. And I would say one of the highlights, definitely the more exciting initiatives and projects I get to work on. So I'm really excited to spend the next 30, 40 minutes talking to you a little bit about how we can build globally inclusive ERG programs. We have a few slides prepared here. I'll talk a little bit about the cultural competency behind global inclusivity. So that could apply to ERGs, that could apply to working with global teams, but a really good foundation to understand what that means and how that can help you create a really collaborative environment. And then we'll get into some best practices in terms of setting up ERGs globally, and making sure you have kind of a unified approach globally, but still looking at it regionally where you can. I've listed my LinkedIn here. Would love to keep in touch with everyone. Feel free to add me. We can follow each other, especially if you have more questions after this or want to connect and talk a little bit more, as I'm sure I can also learn from all of you too. So let's jump into it. And of course, at the end, we will have time for questions. So you'll see that there is a Q&A feature where you can submit your questions. There's also a resources feature where the slide deck is uploaded. So feel free to save that down and use it later on for your teams. To kind of go into cultural dimensions, like I was saying, I've really worked a lot on building ERGs in a few of my roles. And even at my current job right now, although my focus is the Americas, we are a global company. So I'm working with global colleagues at all times. Our ERGs are regionally driven, but we have global chapters, especially in Germany, across Europe. So it's been really cool to understand how we can collaborate with different backgrounds and different communication styles and whatnot. And I think that's a really big key to solving how to have collaborative ERGs. But as I said before, you can really apply this to even like your day-to-day, work environment, working with global colleagues, working on different projects. And where I always like to start is talking about cultural dimensions. There's so many different aspects of this and facets of this. And there's a really good book by Erin Myers that covers this very well. So I highly encourage you to take a look at that when you have some free time. But what it covers mostly, are these concepts of how there's so many different versions of the same type of element in each culture. So whether you're talking about the way someone communicates or the way trust is built on teams, even leadership styles, there's so many differences and sometimes similarities. But it's really important to take that step back and understand that, okay, like not everyone is going to have the same thought process as me. Not everyone will have the same way of communicating. I think a very simple example of that, I could say in the US, you hear this a lot where you're like, oh, I'm from New York, so I think I could say this, where, we're hustling. Sometimes you have like a packed agenda, you're going in, starting your meeting with topics right away. Whereas, now when I work with my colleagues in Europe, it's sometimes important to talk about some personal things, or just like, how's your day? Like catching up a little bit, grabbing a coffee, then starting the meeting. So you really see kind of different dynamics and different elements. And This applies to understanding ERGs too, because as you work with people across the board, you want to know that, this person might have a different communication style, or the concept of time might really vary for someone in South America versus North America. So how can you really wrap your head around that so you can avoid issues in the future? We won't go into each of them, but I wanted to highlight communicating the most because I think that is very relevant in your day-to-day. And I really like this picture. I think it shows so many elements of that, where you see all the way on the left where someone's like, why didn't he shake my hand? In some cultures, that's not appropriate always in opposite genders. Sometimes people just like to, be respectful, and there's no touching, whereas some cultures it is very appropriate. You see people bowing up there and you're like, okay, what do I do next? Like, what's the next thing here? Kind of being really cognizant of that. Should I give him my business card? Like, is that appropriate here or not? And even the last one sticks to me so much. I think being a New Yorker with, like, if someone's really talking super close to your face, you're kind of like, give me my personal space. But sometimes people do that from some cultures out of respect to make that eye contact, show them that you're really interested, you're really present. So this picture kind of shows how it can easily be misconstrued, but it's always good to go in with this mindset of, first of all, empathy, like know that everyone comes from a different background, comes from a different walk of life, but also understanding, like, we're different people. So how can I meet you in the middle and really understand each other to work well together? Building that confidence is key to understanding how to have the global ERGs. Again, I think it's so critical for you as individuals to build this, but if you do have ERGs at your organizations, you have board members that are leading the way and organizing events, I always encourage people to like go through some exercises of cultural competence, like understand what that means. There's so many fun activities and exercises that you can do to really see where you land on it. Because I think when the board members are kind of on the same page about this globally, again, makes it a lot easier to work together. And we'll cover a quick exercise too that could be more of like a takeaway. But to kind of highlight this in a nutshell, when you have this cultural competence, it's really about the ability to be able to communicate effectively, interact with people across different cultures, different policies, different attitudes. And when we think about the word culture, it really refers to so many things, from beliefs to values and thoughts of a racial, ethnic, or religious group. And you really want to be able to establish that so you can function effectively. A few things you can do here, practicing openness by demonstrating acceptance of difference. So like celebrating the differences, being willing to know that it's okay to be different, and having that tolerance and respect behind that. Being flexible, I think that's key as well. Like, things aren't always going to go your way. So maybe you are going into a meeting with some other ERG board members or members, and they have a different style. Like maybe you won't cover all your agenda items, or something gets in the way and you kind of go off tangent. So just be flexible enough to not let you throw that off. Demonstrating humility, I think that is so critical. Again, I would say this applies to ERGs, but also generally to build inclusivity in the workplace, knowing that no matter who you are, how experienced you are, you might make a mistake, you might say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. And we all know that it's never someone's intention, but the impact is what really matters. So be humble enough to own that, learn from it, and grow from it, to be able to really like move past it, as opposed to being defensive or getting into an argument or whatnot. So practicing that humility really goes hand in hand with, empathy and inclusivity. The last three really talk about that empathetic mindset. So being sensitive to others with cultural differences, but be curious too. So like wanting to learn about different backgrounds and cultures, like genuinely having interest in it so you can get to know people, and just like actually practicing the positive change. So like putting it into action and treating others the way you want to be treated as well. I think it goes a very long way. A simple thing here too, I think, that I've seen done at my jobs, and something previous jobs and my managers have done even when I was interning, I remember, is like getting to know each other. I think the first time you work on a project, especially as ERG board members, as you get to know each other, we've gone through exercises to understand, what is your communication style? How do you prefer feedback? Do you like meetings with agendas or more concepts and open-ended questions. So you can really try to understand each other's working styles to the best of your ability, and avoid any like mishaps in the future, because that's bound to happen when you're working with people. So as long as you can build that early on, it really goes a long way. I also want to encourage you to think about this concept of culture fit versus culture add. I think for so many years, especially in corporate America, we've heard this word, like, do they fit into the culture? Especially in interviewing and, getting a new person on the team or meeting someone new on a project. And it's usually people who reflect and showcase the beliefs, values, and behaviors of an organization. And that sounds positive, right? Like, we want that. We want people to be able to align to that. But in addition to that, it's really important to think about it as a culture add, where someone can bring diverse opinions, skills, and backgrounds to improve the culture in the business. So they might be different, their resume might look different, their project skills might look different, but that's actually going to add to the diversity of your company and the diversity of your ERG and whatnot. So really embrace that concept. Try to look for people to add on as opposed to always fitting in and like molding into your culture. This is the activity I referred to, so we won't do it obviously here, but I highly encourage you to take a few minutes to do this after the session. Very quick exercise. It's called the 14 Personal Competencies by Hogan. And basically what you do is rate yourself on a scale of 1 being the lowest to 5 being the highest, in the areas that I'll show in the next slide. And as you add up your points, it'll tell you, if you're between 60 to 70, you're pretty highly culturally aware, 50 to 60, moderate, and then 0 to 50, you need some more practice. And be honest, it's for yourself. Don't judge yourself. I think it's a really great way to have awareness and build on that. And they're pretty quick, 14 prompts talking about flexibility, empathy, and things like that. So again, as a reminder, it's in the resources tab. Download it, take a look at it, and even look into it further, because there's more similar exercises that you can do on your own or with your ERG board members too. So going into more of the ERG setup, I thought it could be really cool to also explain, which I think some of you might be familiar with if you have ERGs, if you're building out groups right now, also is very valuable to this. And I think this level of membership applies to both regional ERGs and global ERGs. I always encourage the groups to be set up in a way where, of course, you have your active members. So these are people typically that are participating in Teams channels. They're helping, or any communication channel that you have, Slack, Team, whatever it is, helping board members with planning and programming as their capacity allows. And you're usually contributing, 2 to 4 hours per month, typically, if that, and as you're able to attend events that are happening. As active members, you're typically engaging and communicating with other members and attending events, but you're not having the responsibility of organizing and planning out events. That really falls on the board members. And I always, like I said, encourage this setup because you have people designated to help you really organize and manage the programming of the ERG. You have budget typically for these groups so they can really maintain that year over year. And then also maintaining communication with your DEI leaders, any sponsors, and their contribution is typically, 4 to 6 hours a month, depending on the quarter, the season. Maybe you're doing more events one quarter versus another. I, as the DEI officer in our company, we have 5 ERGs at the moment, and all 5 have board members, active members, and I touch base with our board members every quarter. All of them together, which has been really helpful because they also learn from each other. And then I also get like a good check-in to understand, what's going on, where can I help them, where can I step in, and then ways that we can make sure we're collaborating without being redundant or repetitive across the events that we're doing. Executive sponsors, highly recommend this. As we all probably know, a lot of these topics, especially with ERGs and DEI, it's so driven by employees from the bottom up usually at companies. And it's so critical to have leadership investment to really make sure that these will these programs will last, they will be effective, you know, we get some really valuable feedback from ERGs. So can we make policy changes, like look at things more long-term? And that sponsor is kind of like your bridge between, you know, the board members and employees and leadership in the company. So this person's typically in some sort of leadership position, helps the team promote ERG suggestions and ideas. And, you know, for us, it's kind of like that bridge between our employees and the Lufthansa Group's leadership team. And the board members really drive that relationship. So you should trust your board members to have, you know, quarterly calls with them, monthly calls with them, check in with them to make sure they're sharing what's going on and whatnot. This is usually, like I said, the way we have set up is regionally driven, but when we think about global ERGs, I also recommend having this setup where each region has their own sponsor, board members, active members, and then at least the board members can collaborate on a global basis, because it doesn't really make sense for active members to engage with each other all the time, since there's going to be a lot of different things happening in each region. So keep that in mind to have this regionally driven where you can, and have some sort of bridge across the board members globally. And we'll get into that a little bit more in terms of best practices across global locations. To kind of talk more about organization, also, it's really important to discuss, you know, the mission and the purpose of your group. So again, this can be created globally. So a mission that really resonates with everyone globally. It makes sense for people globally, but at the same time, you want to have a purpose and programming plan that is specific to your region. So although maybe, you know, we have a group called Diversify for the LGBTQ community, we have a regional chapter and a chapter in the Americas and in Europe. And their overall mission is pretty similar. You know, they want to build a safe space for the LGBTQ community and allies, raise awareness, have events, and promote that across the company. But the purpose and the programming that each region does is quite different. So although we all are celebrating Pride Month in June and doing, you know, really cool events, our events will vary across the rest of the calendar year, because what makes sense for something in New York might not make sense in Germany or Frankfurt. So that's something to keep in mind. Good to have a unified approach, but also a tailored approach for a region. Budget and administration, also highly recommend that your budget is allocated per location. I think as a DEI leader, if you are someone who is overseeing all of the groups, you can see the total budget and see how much is being allocated to every location, but give the autonomy to each of the board members for their region to be able to manage their budget. And I also think it could vary, right? I think the cost and expenses might look very different in one city versus another. So you want to think about that and align it to what the rest of the business units are doing for other programming and events. So you can also tie that into the company's larger planning and purpose. So it's not kind of like being treated separately. A budget and events tracker. I didn't upload like a tracker example here, but if anyone is interested, shoot me a message. I can always show you an example. I think it is so valuable to have a tracker and a dashboard. I mean, I'll make a plug for Chesney. They do a great job at these things. You can always get in touch with them as well. You can build something in-house to just make sure you're tracking the ROI of your events, expenses, programming, how many people are attending, the feedback you're getting, because at the end of the year, it's always really good to discuss that and plan ahead. And again, this is valuable to have per region, but maybe you share the tracker globally so people can have like best practice sharing as they plan. And, you know, if they know something's happening in New York, like, do we want to do something around the same time in Frankfurt or whatnot? And the last piece, silos and collaboration. I think that's the number one takeaway here. Like, you're going to have this idea of being unified and having a similar purpose, but know that you'll also be working in silos because you'll have your own regional purpose too. And think about this in a way where you're operating similar to how business units are set up in global firms. I always encourage DEI leaders and peers to like set up their groups as similar to business units as you can, and make it a part of the business's strategy, because that really helps it, again, be effective, be fully embedded into your company's culture, and not kind of treat it as like a side project or like a side thought. I really think it goes a long way when DEI is existing and ERGs are existing as a part of your culture, as opposed to being like an afterthought or an added thought or being treated separately. So that's a little bit about organization. To kind of go into global best practice sharing. So again, think about what we spoke about with the culture piece, understanding how there's going to be different cultures. You want to build that confidence. Having the approach that, yes, you can have unified mission and values across the board, but have your own regional mission and purpose as well. So how can we combine that and make sure it works well? One thing that I recommended earlier too was to conduct monthly, quarterly calls with board members across the location. So if you have board members of the same group sitting in different cities or different countries, I should say, do maybe quarterly or monthly calls where you can discuss best practices, what's worked really well that quarter, what can improve, and just any ideas. I think that goes a very long way. And it helps people not reinvent the wheel. So if someone is doing a really cool project or event, have it all planned out, and you want to do something similar, you can very easily kind of like copy and paste as much as you can without having to kind of do all the work. It helps in a very good way. The second bullet kind of emphasizes that. So, sharing what's happened, what's working well, what can be improved to learn from each other. Another big thing here is being mindful of time zones when organizing virtual events. So, of course, when you're doing in-person events as global ERGs, you're catering to your city, to your region, and those are the attendees that are coming. What we do at Lufthansa when we do have virtual events, at times, if we think it's relevant, they'll share it with our global colleagues. And if the time zone, we'll try to be mindful of it, so it is earlier on in the day and Europe can join in as well. It goes a long way because, again, sometimes you want more of a turnout. You want more people to be interested, especially when you have speakers and external guests coming, or even big leaders from the executive board. The more the better. So as you do plan, if it allows, try to be mindful of time zones so you can share the virtual events with your global colleagues. Being mindful of language, I think that is so critical, and social expressions. I say that in a way where, sometimes there are slangs or expressions or the ways we communicate or references that might not really resonate across the globe. And it's something so simple, but again, it comes from this building of the cultural sensitivity and competence. So as you work with people across the globe, especially as board members, or even when you're hosting an event virtually, be mindful of like the words that you're using and the expressions that you're using, because some people will understand it, some people won't. And if you do, I think that's fine. Maybe explain it so they know what you're saying and everyone is kind of a part of it. So you have kind of like, awareness on that. Training for ERG leaders, that is also really important. It's something that I'm personally working on, want to start building that out a little bit more for our board members here at the Lufthansa Group. So I think when you work in such a global company, having workshops with board members and ERG leaders can go such a long way. So, we talk about these topics a lot of inclusion and bias, cultural sensitivity, but getting everyone in a room, doing a workshop together, making sure you're all on the same page can go such a long way and is so impactful, and a really good way to learn from each other. So if you're doing that, for example, in the Americas, try to do the same thing in Europe, because you want everybody to be on the same page as much as possible. If one area is trained up and, did the workshop and the other didn't, they'll kind of be a bit disconnected. So that's another reminder there. If you're at a company where people travel a lot, I think if you're going back and forth, if you're meeting people from different countries at a lot of times, think about how to incorporate that into your ERG best practice. So for example, if I'm a part of the Empower Women group here and I'm traveling to Frankfurt and we have a group there, maybe my ERG board member from here can introduce me to someone there and get to meet them. Maybe there's an event happening in Germany while I'm there, and at least I can try to go and attend it. So that can be a really cool way to bridge the gap, especially when locals are visiting your city. So I think it takes a little bit of work there because you're not going to be in the Teams channel or Slack channel all the time. But if you can do a quick introduction, get people together, at least people can meet colleagues from across the world in a much easier way. And I think that really takes out so much of that intimidation factor of traveling and meeting new people. Especially if you work at a large company, it's hard to kind of go and like set up a call and meet people in person. And this can be a very good way to be able to do that organically. Another really great idea here is launching like a monthly ERG newsletter, and that can be shared firm-wide, so with regional and global updates. So that would take some coordinating. Again, if you have someone in a position of managing all of the ERGs, have someone like in a DEI leadership position, they can kind of oversee this, collect updates from all of the groups and have it kind of like a monthly or quarterly newsletter to update employees. This one brings a lot of awareness on the different groups, but two, it helps recruit more members. So you want to keep, the momentum going. You want to keep the groups attractive. So as you launch what cool events they're doing and what initiatives they're working on across the globe, include a way for people to join, like how can they join and how can they get to meet people. So it's kind of like a win-win where you're spreading awareness and also getting more members on your team. And this can be like a simple email that goes out if that's something that your firm allows, or if you have like an internal website, having it there every month or quarter so people can easily access it. And again, it's a bit of coordination, but I think it could go a long way. And then lastly, one thing I wanted to wrap up with was doing some sort of like year-end ERG summit or offsite. I think that's something that is a really great way to show appreciation and like recognize the board members and all of the work that they've done, all of the time they've contributed. If your budget allows, like it would be so cool to get all of your global members together, talk about what's happening in each region, talk about how the year went, budget, administration, planning for the next year, and then still have some opportunity to network, mingle, get dinner, and really enjoy your time together. And if it doesn't allow globally, you can always do this on a regional scale. So either way, I think it's highly encouraged if you have the budget to do so, because I think we had another session earlier too with just like continuing to motivate ERG board members and DEI leaders. And I think this is a really great way to do that, getting everybody together once a year and discussing that and just having fun at the end of the day. So these are some best practices that have worked in my experience, and I think it could go a long way if you're starting up your ERGs or already have it, especially at global companies. We'll wrap up there. So hopefully this was some good lessons for everyone to take away, think about it, some food for thought. Definitely download the resources. And like I said, please do keep in touch. I would love to learn more about your experiences. If you have like specific questions, we can always address it. And I'm gonna stop sharing because I think there's a few questions in the chat that I'll cover now. Let's see. Yes, someone made a comment about the culture map book. It is a really good one. Okay, so I got a question saying, are ERGs generally open for all to join, or is there a membership? That's a really good question. I think it depends on the life cycle of where you are with your ERG. So if you, for example, we just started our ERGs for the first time here for the Americas region last year, and it was very new. So we didn't put a cap on members yet because we wanted to just recruit as much as we can. And the way we have it set up is we have a Teams channel. People can join, learn about events, attend events. What I've learned in my experience is that typically there's quite some turnover in membership. So people will join, some people will kind of become like pretty inactive members. Some people will leave and not really join. So I always think it's good to keep it open because you'll continue to have that turnover. Because even in some of our groups, we'll have 70 to 80 members, for example. But when we do events, typically sometimes, depending on the event, if it's a smaller intimate event, 12 people are joining. If it's a larger one, sometimes more are joining. So I found it valuable to not cap it in the beginning because you're trying to grow your ERG. As you become more prominent, successful, and there's like a established group, you can then think about, okay, like, do we want to only have certain timelines in the year where we're accepting new members? So maybe it's at the beginning of the year, and then the summer again, that's when new people can join, because you want to keep it kind of like close enough where active members are engaging. And it's not just, 200 people in a Teams channel and not talking to each other. There's another question where it says we're a global workforce, but relatively small, around 800, and still building engagement. Our ERGs really struggle with this global inclusion piece, and we don't have enough involvement in leadership to run a chapter-based model. What other ways can we do this, especially if we have all board members of a group located in the same country? That's a really good question. So I think with the leadership piece, that's, again, really critical. If you could try to revamp that and try to get some people to get more involved from like a executive sponsor level, it could just be good because it shows that the board members, when they are putting so much work in this, they're being recognized, they have the support, because it helps with motivation. I think as hard as that piece is, and I know, leadership is busy, they can't always get involved. It goes a long way to keep your board members motivated. When I was setting this up, I actually had met some leaders and would have coffee chats with them and talk about the groups and see who's interested. But I actually leveraged my board members a lot too, because especially coming in new, some of my board members have been here for 5 years, 10 years. And I was like, hey, like, if you know a good leader, you have a good relationship with them, like, talk to them, tell them what the sponsor role entails and get them on board. And most of the sponsors came through that. So if you can kind of leverage your board members a little bit in that sense, use your connections and your network, that could be really helpful. And then if you have all of the board members in the same country, I think the approach you might want to start with is making sure you're building a good regional foundation. So before kind of jumping to the global scene, I would focus a lot on, okay, like, this is the country they're in, let's keep it regionalized. Let's have that strong foundation. And then maybe the next year, like the next phase of your ERG would be to add on that next country, gain interest, and continue building it. It's a slow and steady race, I'll say. Like, it takes a very long time. Like, we're still kind of in that regional phase 2, getting there globally. But I think, the first year when you're starting ERGs is so much about just making sure the people in your country and your city are getting it together. So that's okay. And I think you could take some time to like build it on globally. I have some other questions here. What are some best practices for ERG program managers with managing global chapters? So some things that I highlighted, again, with programming, I think it's always good to keep in mind, like, how can you try to be a little bit unified? So like, if, for example, our diversified community focus on the LGBTQ chapter, and allies, they always try to, there's so much going on in June. It's huge with Pride Month. So we try to organize it in a sense where, like, what is every region doing? And like, even within the region, what are each offices doing? And it's kind of overwhelming because there's so many events going on. So that's when we'll really like create a one pager, like, this is what you can look out for, know what to expect. So like, people from all over the firm can know, like, okay, like, this is my designated city, this is how I can sign up or get involved. So as board members, I think it's good to make sure, like, whether you have some sort of communication with members and the firm, again, newsletter, one pager, it's helpful to make sure that it doesn't get too overwhelming and too much information. And like, if I'm looking for something in New York, I can easily see that and register. And then, if you're doing virtual events, of course, I think what I said earlier with time zones, like, try to be mindful of that. If there are things, if the cities allow, I'm sure, if you're here and you have an office in Asia, it's going to be very difficult. But if it's close enough, like Europe, maybe you can do something early in the morning, do events, and then invite people from both locations to have a better ROI of attendees and participants. So do that as much as it allows, but you might be taking more of a regional approach where needed in person. Right. Any other questions before we wrap up? And someone made a great comment in the chat about using data to help inspire activation from leadership. I think that's such a great suggestion. I've learned that quickly in my career that people love numbers. So as much as you can show how these ERGs are helping with things like retention, employee motivation, like, with events, how many people are attending. If you can break it down by like business units, you can show like these people are from sales versus HR versus this, like leadership likes to see that. And if they see like, a lot of my team and my business unit is represented, I should be a part of this and get involved. It's also a really great way to encourage activation. Words tell, numbers show, and combined they inspire. That is what a good way to end the session. Thank you, David. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. Really good questions and comments. I hope this was helpful. Again, as a reminder, download the resources and shoot me a message or connect on LinkedIn so we can keep in touch and hopefully enjoy the rest of your session with Chessie. Take care, everybody.